watching CramerSez.
Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. The reason I think everything was kind of going wacko is because of what this next amendment is. You have to listen to this. Listen carefully to what this amendment that just got read into this meeting. This is disgusting, America. I got to go back. This is a serious issue. There was an amendment just offered on the House floor that just called Republicans the most racist creatures on the face of the earth. Let's see if we can get this back here. I'm gonna go back here real quick and see if we can actually get the original audio. I don't know if we'll be able to do that. Can we do that? We can't do that. Okay. This is definitely going to be a big deal tomorrow. We were in the process of shutting down when they started. This is what the big hullabaloo is, because now this may be a walkout of the Republican Party from this hearing. Disgusting what they just did. Democrats are fucking pigs. You're vile, deplorable, disgusting.
Yeah, you're recognized.
I'll withdraw my request to
strike those words. Okay. I do want to take a moment and remind all the members that they should direct their comments to the chair. And, you know, if you disparage a group, that's getting pretty close to disparaging an individual, which we all know is against the decorum rules. So just be aware of that going forward, and the gentleman may continue.
Great. Thank you, Chairman. This amendment is entirely about letting the American people know what's going on here. It's not about 6, 7, or whatever violations that are being alleged.
That's who it is. It's that little fucking cunt.
Still does not accept that Joe Biden is the president.
What a little
this
peckerwood.
Just like the
listen to what he says.
Joe Biden that they've got going down the track is a continuation
he is Adam Schiff
of the
3.0. I swear to God.
They didn't accept the outcome of the election. The majority of them voted to overturn it. Many of them cheered on the terrorists who did that. Many of them show comfort and aid to those terrorists by going to the DC jail. And here, this is just a continuation of the insurrection by trying to get rid of a secretary who has the hardest job in the whole administration, while the president and the most conservative Republicans in the Senate are trying to solve the problem. And it's not just angering me and my colleagues. Read the Wall Street Journal editorial board that just dropped an opinion a couple hours ago that said, this is ridiculous. It's not going to solve any concern that you have. Listen to Senators Tillis and Thune and Romney and others over in the Republican Senate chamber saying,
the rhinos.
This is trying to do Donald Trump's bidding and putting politics in front of people, essentially. And so we have an opportunity to do something in a bipartisan way. So again, I respect my colleagues on our side who are taking some of these allegations at their word, but let's just be real. This is about this law firm working on behalf of one client, Donald Trump, to carry out his petty grievances, and he wants Mayorkas gone because he wants the problem at the border to get worse, not to get better. So we should just call it what it is. That's what makes it so germane, and if they don't like us calling what it is, they have the votes to vote it down, but they're not going to silence what's really going on out there, and that is we have a president who's working every day to try and bring us together, find solutions, and we have a former president who would not want to govern, but would always, always choose chaos and to ruin. And with that, I yield to the ranking member.
The gentleman yields. You yield to the ranking member. The ranking member, you are recognized for 1 minute and 15 seconds.
Thank you very much. I support the maker of this amendment. Clearly, truth is the best disinfectant of any operation. I compliment the gentleman from California in his resolution amendment. Mr. Chairman, it is clear that this impeachment effort is all about making sure that Donald Trump is satisfied as the potential Republican nominee for president. He's already said
The gentleman's
clearly-
time has expired. They're starting the clock again, and I'm not sure why, but the gentleman's time has expired. And I want to just say that I have heard both.
Mr. Chair,
They
the
just-
clock's still going.
I know, they just reset it to 5 minutes and started it again, and that's not what was, I mean, the previous time, he had 1 minute and 14 seconds when you started, and that time expired. I have heard the point of order, and I have heard the gentleman who offered the amendment. The chair is ready to rule. This is about an election. It has nothing to do with this impeachment. And pursuant to House Rule 16, Clause 7, the amendment does not satisfy the subject matter and the fundamental purpose test. Therefore, it is not germane and is out of order.
Mr. Chair, I appeal the ruling of the chair.
Gentleman appeals the ruling of the chair.
Mr. Chairman, I move to table.
Gentleman moves to table. Assume. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no? No. The ayes have it. The motion is moved to the table.
Chair, we ask for a recorded vote.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. McCall. Aye. Mr. McCall votes aye. Mr. Higgins. Aye. Mr. Higgins votes aye. Mr. Guest. Mr. Guest votes aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop votes aye. Mr. Jimenez.
Aye.
Mr. Jimenez votes aye. Mr. Pfluger.
Aye.
Mr. Pfluger votes aye. Mr. Garbarino. Aye. Mr. Garbarino votes aye. Ms. Green.
Aye.
Ms. Green votes aye. Mr. Gonzalez.
Aye.
Mr. Gonzalez votes aye. Mr. LaLota. Aye. Mr. LaLota votes aye. Mr. Ezell. Aye. Mr. Ezell votes aye. Mr. D'Esposito. Aye. Mr. D'Esposito votes aye. Ms. Lee. Aye. Ms. Lee votes aye. Mr. Luttrell. Aye. Mr. Luttrell votes aye. Mr. Strong.
Aye.
Mr. Strong votes aye. Mr. Burkeen.
Aye.
Mr. Burkeen votes aye. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane votes aye. Ranking Member Thompson. Ranking Member Thompson votes no. Ms. Jackson Lee. Mr. Payne.
No.
Mr. Payne votes no. Mr. Swalwell.
Nope.
Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Correa. No. Mr. Correa votes no. Mr. Carter.
No.
Mr. Carter votes no. Mr. Tanadar. No. Mr. Tanadar votes no. Mr. Magaziner.
No.
Mr. Magaziner votes no. Mr. Ivy.
No.
Mr. Ivy votes no. Mr. Goldman.
No.
Mr. Goldman votes no. Mr. Garcia. No. Mr. Garcia votes no. Mrs. Ramirez.
Ramirez votes no.
Mrs. Ramirez votes no. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Menendez votes no. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes no. Ms. Titus. Ms. Titus votes no.
How am I recorded? How's the chair recorded?
Chairman, it's not recorded.
The chair votes aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Did we miss someone?
how am I
How's
recording?
Miss Jackson Lee
Ms.
recorded?
Jackson Lee is not recorded.
No.
Ms. Jackson Lee votes no.
Clerk will report the tally.
On that vote, Mr. Chairman, there were 18 ayes and 15 noes.
The ayes have it, and the appeal of my ruling stands. The tabling motion stands. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, number 37.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved, and the clerk will distribute the amendment.
Okay, well, we'll jump back in here real quick while they're playing their little parliamentary games. Folks, I don't know if you've been watching the news tonight, other things that are going on around the world, but it's interesting. I was watching, looking over at Gateway Pundit, and there's a couple of stories that are jumping out. Again, it's now reported that the convoy of trucks headed to the border, cars, trucks, vehicles of all kinds headed to the border, is now somewhere in the ballparks of 400,000. The Missouri AG may sue Biden. Supreme Court to hear free speech case. Musk Neuralink success. Mysterious blob in Texas weather radar and more. All of that's at the Gateway Pundit. You get it. But what I got is the 400,000 vehicles that are headed to the border. And if you do the calculation, at a minimum, that's 400,000 people. But we know that most of these vehicles are caravan. This is time for the American people to pay attention to what's going on here. To understand that the game that these DC elites have been playing on the left and on the right,
The clerk will report the amendment.
those days are up. They're numbered. They're coming
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to HRES 863 offered by Mr. Swalwell of California, number 037. Page 2, line 2, strike, quote, in his, end quote, and all that follows through page 20, line 11, and insert the following. Under President Trump, several administration officials failed to comply with subpoenas issued by the Committee on Homeland Security to appear before Congress or provide documents including 1, former Department of Homeland Security
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with.
Respectfully, I object, Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will continue to read the amendment.
Former Department of Homeland Security official Kevin McAleenan for failing to appear for a public hearing on terrorist threats facing the country. 2, former Department of Homeland Security official Chad Wolf for failing to appear for a public hearing on worldwide threats to the homeland. 3, former acting National Counterterrorism Center Director Russell Travers for failing to appear for a public hearing on terrorist threats facing the country. And 4, Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security Joseph Kafari for failing to provide documents related to a review of the deaths of 2 children while in the custody of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. By contrast, Secretary Mayorkas has testified before Congress over 24 times since taking office, more than any other member of President Biden's cabinet. Secretary Mayorkas has testified before the House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security 6 times since his confirmation in February 2021, including 1, March 17, 2021, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testified before the House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security on, quote, the way forward on Homeland Security, end quote. 2, September 22nd, 2021, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testified before the House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security on, quote, worldwide threats to the homeland 20 years after 9/11, end quote. 3, April 27, 2022, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testified before the House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security on, quote, a review of the fiscal year 2023 budget request for the Department of Homeland Security, end quote. 4, November 15, 2022, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testified before the House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security on, quote, worldwide threats to the homeland, end quote. 5, April 19, 2023, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testified before the House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security on, quote, a review of the fiscal year 2024 budget for the Department of Homeland Security, end quote. And 6, November 15, 2023, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testified before the House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security on, quote, worldwide threats to the homeland, end quote. The Department of Homeland Security has further provided over 20,000 pages of documents to congressional committees in the 118th Congress, 13,000 of which were provided to the House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security alone. On January 11, 2024, Secretary Mayorkas offered to make himself available to testify before the House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security during purported impeachment proceedings.
Mr. Chairman, I insist on my point of order pursuant to House Rule 16, Clause 7. The amendment does not satisfy the subject matter and the fundamental purpose test, therefore it is not germane and out of order.
Does the gentleman who offered the amendment wish to be heard on the point of order?
Yes, please.
You have the floor.
This amendment would point out the blatant hypocrisy of a side that did nothing when Trump administration officials did not respond to subpoenas, but now is taking issue with the Secretary of Homeland Security, who wanted to show up but just couldn't come at the day that they wanted. And so now they want to ban this amendment, and a MAGA ban on amendments is very on brand for MAGA, who wants to ban your body, ban your books, ban your marriage, and now I guess when it comes to debate, ban your amendments. But as I look at it with the help of our very astute parliamentarian, this amendment does not violate either the subject matter or fundamental purpose tests of germaneness. It doesn't touch the fundamental purpose test, which is the baseless impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, which remains in the resolution. The subject matter of the articles is also sufficiently broad to justify the inclusion of any additional context. So again, this is about just reminding people a number of different times people in the Trump administration were subpoenaed to come in and they just blew off
Eric
Congress.
Holder did.
But now that is the
Louis Carter
predicate,
did.
one of the
I
justifications
name others.
that is being used by this MAGA Trump law firm to justify the impeachment of Mayorkas. And again, we just have to make it clear to the American people, these allegations are really about one man's petty grievances. He didn't win the last election. He was blown out by 70 plus electoral votes and 7 million plus popular votes. And now he has to continue the insurrection that he led on January 6th by trying to get rid of the Secretary of Homeland Security.
You know, I'm going to stop him. It'd be nice if these motherfuckers, if they're going to keep saying that an insurrection happened, to at least arrest one person, indict one person, and convict one person of armed insurrection. Because nobody does an unarmed insurrection. Nobody. Not one time in history. Hey guys, we don't have any guns. We know you got all your guns, but if you'll just step down, we'd love to take over control of the government. You gonna let us do that? Doesn't happen. These fucking morons. They're destroying our nation. They're taking our nation to the brink and then begging us to let them fuck us in the ass one more time. It's disgusting.
Obviously, he wasn't given enough time in this impeachment process. Facts about it, he wasn't even given due process in this effort. So clearly, it's already decided that he will be impeached. Democracy, the rule of law, principles of justice and fair play has no place in this impeachment proceeding. It's clear a simple request for an attorney to be present and other items are generally accepted norms in a democracy. But obviously, that's different here. And so it's unfortunate. My colleagues can talk about other things.
I told you.
And I
Didn't we tell you
understand
this
that.
day would come? We
But there are
told you
some
to stop
fundamental
playing the
principles.
games that you were playing. We told you the pendulum would come back. And the stuff you were doing against us with Trump, we told you that would come back to smack you in the face. And where are we? Where are we? Listen, folks, this is human nature. These motherfuckers ain't any different than anybody that you see on a reality TV show. They are so fucking shallow. The majority of them are not there because they're there for you. They're there for them and their buddies and their donors and their K Street lobbyist friends. That's who they're there for. How do I know? Because I used to work in it. That's what I did for a living. I worked in politics. I did the media for politics until COVID. When all these people that I helped get elected didn't stand up, didn't do what they said they were going to do in their TV commercials. They're doing them right now. As this election cycle gets heated up, folks, you're going to hear the same thing. I'll go to D.C. I'll go to the Capitol. I'll fight for you. No, they won't. The ones that didn't stand up before definitely won't do it. How do I know? They didn't do it. They had an opportunity. They didn't do it. That's why we got to get fresh blood. People that are pissed off about what's going on in this nation and willing to actually work to change it. Throw the lobbyist out. Throw the special interest out. Get back down to the constitutional core that is our nation. We'll go back here to the program.
And it has really, I mean, that's pretty much what the gentleman from California said, that made this pretty much all about the election. It's not about this impeachment proceeding, and therefore, pursuant to House Rule 16, Clause 7, the amendment does not satisfy the subject matter and the fundamental purpose test. Therefore, it is not germane and is out of order.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. There's nothing in the amendment that relates in any way to an election. It talks about prior Department of Homeland Secretary.
That's not a point of order, actually. The chair has ruled.
Mr. Chairman, I appeal the ruling.
There is an appeal to the ruling.
Mr. Chairman, move to table.
There's a motion to table the appeal of the ruling. All those in favor say aye to the tabling motion. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Recorded vote, please.
Recorded vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. McCall. Mr. McCall votes aye. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins votes aye. Mr. Guest. Mr. Guest votes aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop votes aye.
Again.
Mr.
more
Jimenez.
games.
Aye.
More and more games, more and more games. They'll go down and play this all night long. This is why we have the problem at the border, folks. This right here. These shenanigans. They're not there to get things done. They're there to obstruct. Now, they'll say that the Republicans are there to obstruct, and from time to time, yes, they are too. They act like, well, Republicans shouldn't do it. We should be the only ones to be able to do it. This will not stop with the same people here. You got to get medicine into the system to heal whatever's wrong with the body. And this body is cancerous. And cancer you have to cut out. And you got to replenish. That's what you have to do here. I don't trust anybody. I've been telling everybody, vote for anybody but the incumbent. Anybody but the incumbent. Nothing else makes sense at this point. We've let them do this time and time again. In 2010, they told us, remember the Tea Party taxed enough already? They were going to go to D.C. and fix things, and what happened to them? They all got captured. Every single one of them. Name a Tea Party person that's still in Congress, still doing that thing and still fighting the fight. Rand Paul, maybe? I think he was actually 2012. Folks, this is it. If you do not understand the situation that our nation is in, and the reason that it's here is because of these jackhandles, they can't get the most basic things done right. And what they want to do is they want to create a system that is more and more and more and more and more complex, with less and less and less and less oversight, just control. That's how we get the Defense Department losing $4 trillion. They've never been able to pass an audit. They've missed all kinds of money. Hundreds of trillions of dollars, maybe. We don't know. Kramer, that's maybe too much. Maybe. But we don't know, because they've never passed one yet. So how much have they wasted? What don't we know about? And these jackhandles, they don't want to do anything about it. What do they want to do? Just keep rolling that can down the road, because it doesn't change their lives at all. It changes ours. They don't give two shits that you can't afford diapers or your car payment's short this month, or you can't afford the mortgage, or you can't get your rent payment made. They don't give two shits because they're not in it with us. They get paid whether we do or not. They get paid whether we can make the mortgage payment. They get paid, and they still expect us to pay more. We're not paying our fair share. So let them eat cake. Folks, it's not going to get any better in this country. And I think why you really should paying attention to what's going down on the border and what's going on down there. People keep saying, well, it's a false. It's either a false flag. This is what's cracking me up. It's either a false flag or it's a trap. Let me ask you this. When our founding fathers decided to cross the Potomac, what do you think that they were thinking? Is it a false flag or is it a trap? They did it anyway. Do the British know we're coming? They did it anyway. It doesn't take a lot of brains to understand that what they fear most is white Americans coming together with black Americans coming along with Hispanic Americans coming along with Asian Americans and gay Americans and every other kind of American that you can imagine, and saying, we're done playing this fucking game that you've been playing. We're done playing dress up. We're done playing all the bullshit. We're done. That's what they fear most. It's the playground, folks. Nothing has changed since the playground. The people on the playground when you were a child, they've just grown up. And the games that they played back then, and the stuff that your mean little sister did in the back seat, or your older big brother did to you as a bully in the back seat of the car, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. That's what we're watching happen tonight. That's who those people became. You know exactly who I'm talking about. The mean girl, the bully. That's who goes to Congress. Because they got to be the boss. And I've been saying for the last 3 years, elections will not solve this. Not at this point. Why? Because they can't even agree on the fucking law that they fucking passed. That's why it will not get fixed. There's an impasse. There's a group of people that say, hey, there's a law here that says you can't let people in. Shall. Congress says, shall do this. That these law enforcement agents shall do these things. This department shall do this thing. They shall do it, not may. There's no discernment. You don't get discretion. Shall do it. That's the law. Conservatives are saying, well, that's the law, guys. Just follow it. And they're saying, no. We disagree. We don't think that that's the case at all. Our policy is not to follow the fucking law. Swalwell keeps talking about the one guy in the room. Yes, this is about one guy, Mayorkas, who has not done his job repeatedly, and then gone to Congress and lied and said the border is secure. Well, I got to ask you this question. Is the border secure? No, they're saying now it's not. They got a problem at the border. So Mayorkas was lying to us, or he's inept. He's incapable of doing his job. And he will allow as many people in as he wants. So which is it? Is he lying? Should he be impeached because he's lying? Or should he go because he's inept? You think that they're going to get this problem fixed in 9 months? You think Joe's going to get that border shut up in the next 9 months? No, what it's going to take is Americans sitting on the border saying you're not coming in. I was asked by a buddy tonight, he says, if somebody comes up to you and they try to come through, ain't coming through. Keep marching. Keep going. We expect more problems from the coyotes and the cartels shooting into the U.S. than we do our government at this point. Because we're messing with their money. There's going to be somewhere in the ballparks of 500,000 to 1 million people on the border in the next few days. It's going to make an impact. We're telling the coyotes, we're telling the cartels, we're done. You send these people to us, we'll send them back to you. They're not coming through. It's time. And the U.S. government has no authority over us because this is our nation. It's our responsibility. When they won't do the job, we do it. Who does the job and who cuts down the trees and starts pulling people out of natural disasters? Who does that before FEMA gets there? We the people. That's who do that. We do that. We the people do that. We don't have to wait on government's permission. We start doing what needs to be done. And right now, the border needs to be shut the fuck down. That's what it needs. We go back to the program.
– standards for impeachment, and certainly not basic common sense and decency. The 1 minute. 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 1
Mr. Chairman, I insist on my point of order pursuant to House Rule 16, Clause 7. The amendment does not satisfy the subject matter and the fundamental purpose test. Therefore, it is not germane and out of order.
The gentleman has made his point of order. Does the gentleman who offered the amendment wish to be heard on the point of order?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be heard on the point of order. I'd like to be heard on.
You're recognized.
Thank you, sir. Well, I think first the amendment speaks for itself, and so I appreciate the reading of the amendment. I think, like as many of my colleagues have said already earlier today, we are clearly in the middle of an impeachment political stunt. But you also don't have to take our word for it. Now, as my amendment makes clear, many of our Republican colleagues agree with me. The Constitution specifies that impeachment is for cases when an official has committed high crimes and misdemeanors. But the majority didn't even give our own secretary the opportunity to testify during this impeachment process, despite his willingness to do so, and our ranking member and others have noted on that many times. Now, we know that Republican leaders were quoted promising donors that they would impeach Secretary Mayorkas in fundraisers back in April of 2023. Now, that isn't what a fair process looks like. And another member of this committee has used this impeachment resolution to solicit money and donations from donors, saying, and I quote, "If you can afford to chip in, please do," end quote. Now, this is the same member who introduced the articles we're voting on today and the articles of impeachment against President Biden on his first day.
The gentleman is reminded that he's to talk on the point of order of germaneness of the amendment.
Absolutely. So this is germane because this is all to appease Donald Trump. Now, the majority isn't remotely serious about solutions. This is about electing Donald Trump and political hits against President Biden. Now, Donald Trump today is sabotaging any negotiations because he thinks the border crisis helps him politically.
Mr. Chairman,
my amendment
point of order.
sets the record straight.
Speak to the point to the issue.
Yeah, and I'm concluding. My amendment
of the
will set the record straight on this impeachment
Hold on
scam.
just a second. The gentleman's point of order is what?
My point of order is that the argument and the chair admonished the gentleman, but he persists in arguing the substance of his amendment, not its germaneness.
That is correct. The substance of the amendment is the point of order is to the germaneness. So you need to argue the germaneness of this.
And it's germane because it's about the process of this impeachment. This impeachment, what I believe and we believe is an impeachment scam and sham. And so this is what the process. To conclude, I think my amendment sets the record straight on this impeachment process. No due process has been given to the secretary, and I urge the committee to adopt it. And for the remainder of my time, I'd like to turn to Ranking Member Thompson.
Thank you very much.
Ranking member is recognized.
Thank you. It's clear, again, the Democrats want to make sure that the record is clear that Republicans have not afforded a broad view of impeachment. It's clear in this hearing that Secretary Mayorkas has not been afforded due process. It's clear that a double standard exists in terms of other individuals who have done similar things but have not been impeached under Democratic and Republican chairmanships. So again, the gentleman from California's amendment speaks clear as to this impeachment inquiry and that it's a political charade to help the other folk politically. He's referenced members of this committee who raise money off the impeachment, and that's not how you do business. He's documented what they've said. The record is clear on that. And so whether you raise money or not, if you get caught, you get caught. And in this instance, we've documented members raising money off this impeachment process. And so clearly, if you support impeachment, then that's one thing. But if you want to raise money off impeachment, just be man or woman enough to say, I did it. Stephen. I yield back.
Chair suspends for just a second. The chair has heard the point of order and has heard the gentleman from California who's made the assertion that there is germaneness, and the chair is prepared to make a ruling. I think, to quote the gentleman from California, it's about an election and President Trump. Again, has nothing to do with what we're doing today. What happened in the past, you can have your opinions about it. Today's the future, and I am prepared to make my ruling. Pursuant to House Rule 16, Clause 7, the amendment does not satisfy the subject matter in the fundamental purpose test. Therefore, it is not germane and is out of order.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to appeal the ruling, please.
Mr. Chairman, a motion to table.
Motion to table has been made. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I'd like a recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. McCall. Aye. Mr. McCall votes aye. Mr. Higgins. Aye. Mr. Higgins votes aye. Mr. Guest. Aye. Mr. Guest votes aye. Mr. Bishop. Aye. Mr. Bishop votes aye. Mr. Jimenez. Aye. Mr. Jimenez votes aye. Mr. Pfluger.
Aye.
Mr. Pfluger votes aye. Mr. Garbarino. Aye. Mr. Garbarino votes aye. Ms. Green.
Aye.
Ms. Green votes aye. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez votes aye. Mr. Lalota. Aye. Mr. Lalota votes aye. Mr. Ezell. Aye. Mr. Ezell votes aye. Mr. D'Esposito. Aye. Mr. D'Esposito votes aye. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee votes aye. Mr. Luttrell. Mr. Luttrell votes aye. Mr. Strong. Mr. Strong votes aye. Mr. Burkeen. Mr. Burkeen votes aye. Mr. Crane. Mr. Crane votes aye. Ranking Member Thompson.
Nay.
Ranking Member Thompson votes no. Ms. Jackson Lee. Mr. Payne. Mr. Payne votes no. Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Correa. Mr. Correa votes no. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter votes no. Mr. Tanadar. Mr. Tanadar votes no. Mr. Magaziner. Mr. Magaziner votes no. Mr. Ivy. Mr. Ivy votes no. Mr. Goldman. Mr. Goldman votes no. Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia votes no. Mrs. Ramirez. Mrs. Ramirez votes no. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Menendez votes no. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes no. Ms. Titus. Ms. Titus votes no.
How am I recorded?
Ms. Jackson Lee is not recorded.
No.
Ms. Jackson Lee votes no.
Anybody else? How's the chair recorded?
Chair is not recorded.
Chair votes aye.
Chairman Green votes aye.
How's Mr. Swalwell recorded?
Mr. Swalwell is not recorded. Mr. Swalwell votes no.
The clerk will report to tally.
On that vote, Mr. Chairman, there were 18 ayes and 15 noes.
The motion to table is sustained. The ayes have it, and the appeal fails. An appeal to the ruling. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Mr. Ivey, you are recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reserve a point of
We have a
order.
point of order, okay. The clerk will distribute the amendment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, this is be fair. Time to withdraw.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to HRes 863 offered by Mr. Ivy of Maryland, number 020. Page 2, line 2, strike quote, "in his," end quote, and all that follows through page 20, line 11, and insert the following. There is
Without
no-
objection, the reading is dispensed with.
Mr. Chairman, I object to waiving the reading of the amendment and ask that it be read.
Clerk may read the amendment.
There is no evidence that constitutes grounds for the impeachment of Secretary Alejandro N. Mayorkas based on the constitutional standard for impeachment. At the first impeachment hearing before this committee on January 10th, 2024, constitutional law professor Frank O. Bowman III of the University of Missouri School of Law testified that, quote, "The conclusion is universal among those who have studied this question and has been so since the time of the founding, that policy differences, no matter how severe, no matter how heated, are simply not grounds for impeachment. A cabinet secretary, like the president, is not impeachable unless he's proven to have committed treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. There's no suggestion that I'm aware of that Secretary Mayorkas has committed either treason or bribery," end quote. Professor Bowman further elaborated that he had, quote, "seen lots of reports about arguments about policy, nothing that rises to the level of an impeachable offense," unquote. Professor Bowman further explained to the committee that it's, quote, "It's critical to note that if we could impeach cabinet officers, or presidents for that matter, anytime there are legal disputes about the application of the law or their exercise of discretion, then every president and every cabinet officer would be impeachable," end quote. At the second and final impeachment hearing before this committee on January 18th, 2024, constitutional law expert and Princeton University law professor Deborah Pearlstein testified that, quote, "Policy differences, and I agree with my colleague at the last hearing, no matter how profound, are exactly not what impeachment was meant to be for. They are policies that the Secretary has pursued under the current President of the United States, who appointed the Secretary and was elected to pursue those policies," end quote. The solution, Professor Pearlstein testified, lies in Congress's legislative power, not its impeachment power. Quote, "The last significant piece of comprehensive immigration legislation to pass Congress with bipartisan support was in 1986. The action under consideration here, impeachment, isn't a tool of policy change, particularly in the impeachment of a single cabinet official who can be replaced by another official given precisely the same role, which will have no effect on the heartbreaking problems we have heard described," end quote. Professor Pearlstein further testified that her, quote, "knowledge just based on Supreme Court cases that have arisen surrounding executive actions over border policies and reading the history there suggests that these problems have existed through 5 administrations over decades, largely because Congress has enacted contradictory laws that are impossible to comply with, and multiple administrations have struggled to resolve that contradiction," end quote.
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw my point of order.
The gentleman withdraws his point of order. I now recognize Mr. Ivy for 5 minutes to discuss his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is, as the ranking member stated previously, an impeachment proceeding which functions essentially like a grand jury with respect to the Senate. It's been made clear already by Mr. Gonzalez and others that this matter is going to move forward, that there's going to be a vote to impeach Mr. Mayorkas, and this will be sent over to the Senate to make a decision as to after a trial. I want to make sure that when the Senate gets the record from the House, that they have a more full record than they have currently. And with respect to the articles of impeachment, Article 1 in particular, but also Article 2, there's a brief reference, a quote from the Constitution that goes to the impeachment standard, high crimes, misdemeanors, and the like. But there's no expert testimony, no legal analysis contained in the articles that would accompany that. We had some testimony about that at the hearing, the first and second hearing. This amendment captures the key testimony from both of those witnesses, Mr. Bowman, Professor Bowman and Professor Pearlstein, with respect to the meaning of the statute, the range of the constitutional law, and the range of it, and goes directly to the issue of the impact of policy disputes and the fact that they should not be the basis for constitutional impeachment proceedings like we're having today. I know the other side disagrees with the testimony that was given, and that's their right. I disagree with some of the statements and many of the much of the language included in the resolution that is going to be voted and sent forward. But I think we have an obligation to the Senate, essentially as fact finders here, to provide to them a fuller record than is being included in the actual language for the articles of impeachment so far. And to the extent this is about fairness and about balance, I don't see how we should vote these down. This is testimony that was received. It's directly relevant to the consideration of impeachment and the trial that will take place. The senators can do what they will with this testimony, but it's there, it's direct, it's relevant, it's based on expert testimony and their expertise in this area of constitutional law. So I ask for support for this amendment so that it can be included in the articles of impeachment. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Green, your record.
thank you. Of the 20 pages in the articles of impeachment, 6 pages of text are solely dedicated to laws Secretary Mayorkas has violated, and 4 pages of text are dedicated to examples of Secretary Mayorkas's lies to Congress and to the American people. Additionally, the article cites 3 different court cases that support certain charges and a Supreme Court case that discusses impeachment as a remedy. It's very clear, very clear. By willfully and systematically refusing to comply with the rule of law, Secretary Mayorkas is making this country less safe, and the facts don't lie. And we've gone over them over and over on this committee. And we've had witness after witness come in and testify to how the country is less safe and how many people have died. But we can review these numbers so that we can all be clear once again. Let's talk about that. Again, CBP alien encounters at the southwest border from February 2021 to December 2023, 7,078,271. February 2017 to January 2021, 2,437,856. Let's talk about Border Patrol apprehensions between ports of entry at the southwest border of terrorists. Fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2024 to date, 331. Fiscal year 2017 to fiscal year 2020, 11. Secretary Mayorkas is making this country less safe. We have over 1.8 million gotaways in this country under Secretary Mayorkas. That is a massive increase under President Trump. Massive increase. There have been approximately 73,000 special interest aliens arrested at our border, which are aliens from a nation that promotes terrorist activities, harbors terrorists, or poses a security threat to the United States. Again, we have over 1.8 million gotaways in this country. Let's talk about the cartels.
Would the gentlelady?
No. The cartels with Secretary Mayorkas are making over $13 billion a year in human trafficking while my Democrats are laughing. Is that funny to you? Human trafficking is not funny.
May I answer that question?
No.
I didn't
This
think so.
revenue is 26 times more than the cartels earned under President Trump. They were only earning about $500 million. With Secretary Mayorkas in charge, they're making over $13 billion selling people, selling children, selling women, trafficking people across the border. The cartels control approximately 40% of Mexico. 11-year-old Aiden Clark was killed after an illegal alien who was released into the U.S. after invading our southern border crashed into a school bus, causing Aiden to be ejected from the bus. 21-year-old Tyler Basin was killed in a deadly car accident last year by an illegal who had no driver's license and fled the scene after he had killed Tyler. A mother and daughter were killed in a car accident in Texas after human smugglers smuggling 6 illegals ran a stop sign while fleeing from police in 2021. We can go on and on. See, you have a quandary. You all are arguing that this is policy. If this is policy, the outcome and the horrific statistics I have quoted, if that is your policies, if that is Biden administration policies, if these are Democrat policies, then these are the policies you have to own. You have to own them, and then you have to tell the American people, these are the policies and this is the results that you bring to America. Or you can admit that Secretary Mayorkas has broken federal law, and he is the one to blame for all of this horror, crime, death, murder, and over 1.8 million gotaways in our country. Democrats get to choose, and you're also in an election year. So are you going to be telling your constituents and your voters that these are the policies and these are the results that you're running for re-election on?
Lady's time has expired.
I hope not. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize Mr. Magaziner for 5 minutes of discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know what I ever did to Chairman McCall that would cause him to accuse me of being a lawyer, but I am not. But we have heard from some very smart lawyers in the course of our hearings and in our collection of evidence. We heard from 2 of the foremost experts on impeachment, as noted in the amendment, Professor Bowman and Professor Pearlstein, both of whom testified that there is no legal basis for impeaching the Secretary. Those were Democratic witnesses. How many experts on impeachment did the Republican majority bring in to testify in front of this committee? 0. They could not find one who would come in and under oath say that the Secretary had committed an impeachable offense. Who else has weighed in on this? Some of the leading conservative legal experts in this country. Professor Dershowitz, Jonathan Turley. Some of the leading conservative legal experts in this country have weighed in. Tonight, the Wall Street Journal conservative editorial page has said that there is not a legal basis for impeachment. Listen to the experts. I'm not a lawyer. Most of the people on both sides in this committee are not lawyers, thankfully. But we should listen to the lawyers who are expert in matters of impeachment, who unanimously, in hearings, experts on impeachment, unanimously, our witnesses who are expert on impeachment said no basis. Leading conservative scholars have said no basis for impeachment. So we should support Mr. Ivey's amendment because it is based on the actual expert opinion, not just by liberal professors, but by some of the leading conservative legal experts in this country. And I have to say, just as an aside, as the ranking member on the Counterterrorism and Intelligence Subcommittee, I am very concerned with any threat of terror to the homeland, as we all must be. And I have to say, it is pretty rich hearing the gentleman from Georgia express her concern about terrorism when she literally was selling defund the FBI t-shirts and hats on her website for $30 a piece. $30 for the shirts and another $30 for the hats. You don't get both for just the $30. The leading law enforcement agency tasked with combating terrorism in this country and keeping people safe, and she wants to defund it. So I am not going to take any lectures from her on securing this homeland from terror. And with that, I yield back.
Oh, sorry. Do it.
Just a reminder, you're not allowed to discuss campaign stuff, like, displaying make a point.
I was not making a campaign pitch. I guess I was for her, because she could donate on
Yeah, you kind of just did, but.
$30 for defund.
Okay, well, let's tone, ladies and gentlemen, tone. All right, thank you. I now recognize Mr. Pfluger for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank my colleague for bringing an amendment where we can actually have a debate, substantive, and actually relevant to the conversation, where the American public can judge, what has actually transpired. So thank you for that, Mr. Ivey. As you look at Mr. Bowman's testimony, one thing that I wish you would have included in this is this statement from Mr. Bowman. In the testimony previously, he said the purpose of impeachment is to remove an official whose continuance in office would pose an ongoing risk of really serious harm to the nation's vital interest. And when you think about that, that's exactly why we're here. That is the point we're here. And I hear the point that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are saying, this is all about policy. No, it's not. As many people on this side of the aisle have debated today, this is about the willful, systemic refusal to comply with the law. And that willful, systemic refusal has led us, and those that we represent, to believe that by not removing Alejandro Mayorkas as Secretary of the Homeland Security apparatus, that it will risk serious harm to the vital interests of the United States. In fact, serious harm has already occurred to our vital interest. I submitted this earlier for the record, and this is the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson's 64 incidents, recorded incidents of the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas's reversal and willful noncompliance with the law. Let me go through just a couple of these because we don't have time to read all 64 of them. February 25th, 2021, the Biden administration sped up releases of UACs. March 16th, 2021, DHS Secretary Mayorkas delivered remarks effectively explaining the border is open for illegal immigration by stating DHS's focus would be on processing illegal aliens. In other words, catch and release and the creation of new lawful pathways. March 20th, 2021, DHS began issuing illegal alien border crossers a notice to report to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement as opposed to a standard notice to appear. The list goes on. July of 2021, DHS released at least 50,000 aliens without giving them a notice to appear. August 17th, 2021, DHS announced an expansion of alternatives to detention, effectively reinstating and expanding catch and release. August 31st, 2021, the Biden administration released over 100,000 aliens into the United States between March of 21 and August 31st of 2021 without giving a notice to appear, instead advising them to self-report to ICE on their own. Of those, nearly 50% of them did not check in with ICE within a 60-day deadline.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Sure.
I would be happy to entertain an amendment to my amendment if the gentleman would like to include additional language from Professor Bone.
I'm not asking you for an addendum to your amendment. I just wish that we would have gotten to the heart of the matter in your discussion. And that's why I'm trying to bring this up, because the heart of the matter is the serious harm to our country that has been caused. And it's been, I don't want to entertain an amendment to the amendment here.
I just had a separate question.
Go ahead.
You and Ms. Green are running through facts. The amendment's not aimed at a factual statement. It's the legal standard. So and it's for the Senate, not for us.
Thank you.
All
and I'm just going back to the testimony that you're referring to in your proposed amendment, which is incomplete, because when you look at that testimony, it really is the serious harm that has been done to our country. And that serious harm comes in the manner of the testimony that we've heard in dozens of hearings in this committee, that we've heard from people who have sheriffs from our local communities, the state level authorities and others. My time has expired here. The point is, serious harm has occurred. This isn't a policy issue. This is failure to comply with laws that are on the books, which is why we are proceeding with the impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. I recognize Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, something that the gentlelady from Georgia said perked up my interest at this late hour, and it was not just her soothing voice, but it was the word quandary, which we've heard recently. We've heard it out of the mouth of Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said that we have a quandary because we, meaning the Senate Republicans, have been working very hard to pass a border security bill, but Donald Trump does not want us to pass it. And as he said in a closed-door meeting of other senators, the quandary is that we don't want to do anything that would interfere with our candidate's ability to win the election. Pretty clear what is going on here. And so I wonder why Ms. Green used the word quandary, when what it truly stands for is the fact that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, directed by Donald Trump, as they often or always are, do not want to pass bipartisan border policy legislation that would fix many of the problems that you all have spoken about all day long. That is the rub, and that is why we're here, rather than negotiating a bipartisan piece of legislation that is needed because the executive branch does not have the authority and the funding they need to deal with the situation at the border. And unfortunately, we are going through this charade, and we will continue to go because you all want to make this issue a political issue for November of this year rather than find actual solutions. I'll yield to Mr. Ivey.
I thank you. I want to say that actually from the last two arguments that we've heard, and I think the sort of stringent claims that this isn't a policy dispute, and clearly, you know, you got a right to that position and you got the votes to carry it. I'm not offering this amendment to try and persuade my Republican colleagues, because I know you're past the point of persuasion. This is about our obligation, our responsibility to send a full and complete record to the Senate for their trial so that they can make a decision based on relevant evidence. And it doesn't get much more relevant than what the legal standard is on this pivotal issue about whether these are policy disputes or not. You can say they aren't. It's very clear to me that they are. You start going through the numbers of the getaways, the number went up, the number went down. Obvious, and the point you're trying to make is that the change in policy was what caused that to happen. How you can then say it's not a policy dispute is, I don't really get, but that'll be up to the Senate. I'm just saying that let's send them the testimony that we received here in this committee that goes directly to the relevant point about the policy dispute, which is the spinoff of the constitutional standard of high crimes and misdemeanors. Why would you object to that? And as I offered to Mr. Pfluger, if you want additional language from Mr. Bowman or Ms. Pearlstein of testimony that they gave, I'd be open to an amendment. Let's talk about it. But, you know, the point is, if we want to send the Senate a full and complete record, and that is our obligation, I just can't see
I could
how-
answer if the gentleman cares to yield.
I yield.
It's sophistic. All of that's in the record of the committee. There's no need to put it in the articles of impeachment. Yield.
I would say this, one of the issues that we've questioned actually was what is going to be the record that's sent over to the Senate or not. And as I understand it, we're sure that the articles of impeachment will be sent over. I'm not as clear on what other evidence is going to be sent over because it hasn't been decided.
But
And this is a
committee
very
record.
different process, I might say, than the ones that I've ever seen with respect to impeachment proceedings. As the ranking member pointed out, the standard due process steps are not in place here. I apologize.
Gentleman's
Mr.
time has
Chairman. I yield.
expired. I now recognize Mr. Jimenez for 5 minutes discussion.
Again, I need to reiterate this one more time, that this is not about policy. This is about policies that circumvent the rule of law. And so, you know, under the guise of writing a policy, you're able to violate the law. If we allow the administrative branch to do that, then we are useless here, because all they simply have to do, well, I know the law says I got to do this, but I'm going to write a policy, and then it's going to be a policy dispute, and therefore there's nothing you can do to me because it's a policy dispute. And on the policy dispute issue, there's a lot been said by you know, folks across the aisle that the on United States versus Texas, Justice Kavanaugh, writing for the majority, 8-1, right, says those, you know, the way that we can influence those policies are oversight, appropriations, the legislative process, and the Senate confirmations. So I'll ask you a question, Mr. Ivey. Do you think that's it? That's what we have as a remedy on policies, again, this is just policies, and I don't agree with just policies, this is actually law, those are the tools that we have, and it's limited to those tools?
I think Justice Kavanaugh also included elections, which is obviously the biggest way to address it.
Except that's not what he said, okay? For example, this is verbatim, okay? This is what he wrote.
Okay.
For example, Congress possesses an array of tools to analyze and influence those policies: oversight, appropriations, the legislative process, and Senate confirmations, to name a few.
Yep.
Not exclusive,
Okay.
all right? To name a few.
Not exclusive.
Now, do we possess the right to impeach? Is that a tool of Congress?
Only if there's been.
If it meets the constitutional standard, and
No, I mean,
it clearly doesn't.
Obviously, we're here in an impeachment hearing, okay, so obviously we have the right to impeach. So
don't
this whole
think-
thing about Justice Kavanaugh saying that somehow impeachment's out of here is a false flag. It's baloney, okay? Because it starts out with, for example, and then it says to name a few. And then your side has been saying, the Democrats have been saying, no, that's it. That's all we can look at. That's not true at all.
If I might.
Sure.
The point we had this discussion with Mr. McCall a few minutes ago. The fact that impeachment was raised during the debate, during the oral arguments at the hearing, and he had the conversation with the Solicitor General, but didn't choose to expressly mention it in his opinion. I said this earlier. I think is instructive. Why would he leave it out if he thought it was such a prime?
Because it says, for example, and it says to name a few, and it says those are the tools that we have, and he just named a few, but impeachment is a tool that we have.
And why didn't he name it in addition to the ones that he?
Well, how many
if
tools do
those-
we have? Do we have like 1,000 tools? I don't know.
Well,
Okay.
to your point,
is he
one
gonna name-
additional is not 1,000.
No, look.
If
Are
he
you-
really thought it was such.
Okay, guys, we're not going to do the
All right,
back and
fair enough.
forth. I appreciate the debate. I mean, I really do. This is good, but I want to make sure we're controlling and we're going to the
And remember,
chair.
I'm not an attorney, I'm just a fireman, okay?
So
All right, so,
you have the floor, or
thank you. And so I'll reclaim my time. And so the point I'm making is that even in Kavanaugh's opinion, it doesn't exclude impeachment. It does not. Because he clearly writes, for example, and he clearly likes to name a few. Just a few. That's what he wrote. And so again, this goes back to your side thinks this is a policy issue. I've said from the beginning that this was done on purpose. And I've said it for the last 2 years. Not recently. I've said it for the last 2 years, sitting on this committee, that what Mayorkas has been doing, what Biden administration has been doing, if you ever see me, I've been on TV a lot, okay? This is on purpose.
Would the
Has
gentleman
been
yield for
done
a
on
question?
purpose. Hold on, I'm still saying, I still, claim to my time. It's done on purpose. They circumvented the law on purpose. They created the crisis on purpose. And now they're crying, gee, I don't have enough resources to deal with a crisis that we created. And so, then Congress has no recourse. Well, I do think we do have recourse. And if we don't have recourse in this case, then we're useless to bring the executive branch, to follow the law, the will of Congress. They are supposed to follow the law. They're not above the law.
Will the gentleman yield to a question?
the gentleman has
7 seconds.
6 seconds, 5 seconds. So my suggestion
When you
is-
get another
Now,
opportunity,
hold on, Mr. Goldman, I did not give you the floor yet.
I'm done.
His time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Ramirez, who may yield to you if she likes.
I'll yield to him in a bit, so that you can continue to argue what we know already, that there is no evidence to this impeachment. But here's where I want to go, actually, because we really haven't talked about this piece. Why did we come to this committee? Why did you select this committee of all the other committees? And why did you come to Congress? Because I came to Congress to pass legislation that makes life better for my constituents. That is policy. So, I heard the gentle lady from Georgia talk about wanting to stop the human traffickers. I do too. I absolutely do. The concerns that we have with illegal crossings, I am also concerned about the illegal crossings. So my question is, let's be honest. Let's say that somehow the Senate vote, that you get this out of this committee at 5 a.m, wherever we get out of here. You bring it to the floor, and then you get enough votes, right, to impeach, and then you send to the Senate, and let's say that this happens. Then the president has to appoint someone else. What solution have you created? Because here's my thing. None of you ever ask yourselves, what is the root cause of migration? How come 5,000 people are coming through our border? Some of you are mothers and fathers. I'm not one. But I would ask myself, why would a mother be willing to go through Venezuela, into Panama, up through Guatemala, and go through the hell that they go through? Because I've been to Guatemala twice in 1 month, and let me tell you, I've talked to these people. And why wouldn't you ask yourself? Because you're the same people that talk about family values and caring about children. You don't ask yourself, what is going to slow down migration? How do we get to the root cause of migration? And friends, our job in this place is to pass policy that addresses these issues with solutions. So here's what I want to propose to you, to the gentle lady from Georgia, but to every single person here. How about we vote on amendments that create the opportunities to address the issue? How about we actually vote to be able to get funding resources to address the issues of fentanyl that we know we care deeply about? How about those of you that serve in judiciary? You go to judiciary and you create legal pathways, and then all of us vote for that. Because the reality is that no one should have to cross illegally. No one should have to pay $10,000. We shouldn't allow these people to profit. But they are profiting, and our children are dying because of your failure to act. So what I am asking you now, stop laughing. Because my family crossed
there,
that
young
border.
lady.
So yes, I take this personal. Let's actually get to the actual work, because you and I know very darn well. Impeaching Secretary Mayorkas is not going to solve the problem. And you are going to find more things so that in November you can try to win elections. Let's stop the political theater. Y'all can go back and forth as attorneys as you have. But I come from a background of social work who has been helping thousands of people for 20 years, and I am asking you to go back to the reason you decided to run for Congress in the first place. With that, I yield the rest of my time to Mr. Goldman.
That's why I'm involved.
Mr. Goldman, you're recognized for a minute 30.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ramirez, for bringing us back to what we're really doing here and why this matters. You know, there have been a lot of aspersions cast at the few of us lawyers here, but impeachment is a legal process.
And well deserved, by the way.
And proving impeachment is a legal process that traditionally, historically, in all other cases, has included evidence. And so, Mr. Jimenez, I understand it is your opinion.
The evidence that you deleted?
The actions that have been taken at the border which you claim to have violated the law, were knowingly, willfully, and intentionally trying to sabotage, subterfuge, and violate the law. And I wonder if you have a piece of evidence, not just your own statement, but a piece of evidence that one would want to introduce.
Want me to answer that?
Court, please, go ahead.
Nobody can be that dumb. That's my evidence.
Well, unfortunately, I'll reclaim my time.
Okay,
unfortunately, if you have ever been in a court of law,
Goldman is the worst attorney
you
on the face of
actually
the
have
earth.
to prove a case
You
with
know,
evidence.
The fireman.
You
The fireman
cannot
just got it.
simply say,
Gentleman doesn't want to yield.
well, I'm done. You cannot simply just say
He doesn't have time to yield.
that no one is
You get
that
2
dumb,
more
therefore
seconds.
he's guilty of a crime. And
All right, the
I
gentleman yields. I'd like to recognize myself for 5 minutes. And look, there have been some good debate tonight, and there's also been some stuff that I think isn't reflective of the fairness that we try to do. And I want to take issue with you never discuss the root causes, Mr. Ramirez, okay? I'm a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I have the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee right here. We have deeply looked into the root causes of migration, and I have a piece of legislation, and he can talk with you about it, called the Nearshoring Act, where we're bringing manufacturing from China to Latin America, and we give loans for them to go to Guatemala and create opportunities in Guatemala, and there are certain, and actually the Democrat State Department, Mr. Ramirez, I went to Antony Blinken and I said, help me make this right. And his expert on Central America gave me good substantive changes to the bill. And so that would allow them to have arrows in their quiver, so to speak, to hold governments in Latin America and throughout the region, to task on corruption and on crime and all the other things that are also root causes. So the assertion that all of us aren't addressing the root causes, that's not a fair statement. So the substantive debate is great. The accusations, a blanket statement like that it's just wrong, because there are people here that are deeply engaged with legislation that we've written with Democrat assistance to try to address the root causes. So I guess I'm just making a point about our debate. I appreciate it when there's some back and forth and people are granting. That's a beautiful thing, because we have a disagreement about whether or not this rises to a high crime or misdemeanor, or whether or not it's policy versus, a policy that violates the laws. That's good to discuss. That's the substantive stuff. Making a blanket accusation about someone's involvement in the root cause, especially when it's blatantly wrong, we shouldn't do that. And I just encourage you, because
Mr. Chair, can I clarify?
Yeah, sure. I yield.
We have not talked. I have not heard your leadership in this committee talk about root causes of migration and therefore then introduce amendments that begins to address that as it pertains to the southern border. Now, what you've done in foreign policy, I respect that. I'm not in that committee with you,
Yeah.
but I am talking specifically to this committee,
Well,
and that's why I said what I said.
If I
in
could
committee.
reclaim my time, all of those issues as it relates to work in Guatemala, that is in the jurisdiction of the Foreign Affairs Committee and not our committee. Our committee is about what Customs and Border Patrol and Protection and what TSA and what those guys do for our government. And for HSI, what they might do in a foreign country, we would get involved in that. But how industry is recruited to create opportunity in Latin America, that clearly falls in the foreign affairs. So we're not going to talk about that here. So, but I just wanted to
No,
make
I
a point. I
appreciate that,
appreciate you
Chairman.
letting me do that, and I yield.
Mr. Chairman, will you yield?
Yeah, I'll yield to you, Mr. Pfluger.
And just to expand on that, I mean, this goes back to the HR2 debate that we had in March of last year. And I appreciate the fact that many discussions were had on the immigration laws. But the point of this committee is about security. And Ms. Ramirez, I was going to ask you to yield. I hear the push factors. We see them. I've been to the Darien region and took members and invited members of this committee to go with me to see those. Push factors are very real. But the pull factors are also very real. And at what point do we say that on a case-by-case basis, parole has exceeded a reasonable amount? What I think is actually extreme are the 10 million people who have come into this country illegally in 3 years in the administration. No doubt. I've talked to thousands of these people. No doubt there are bad situations going on. But when you look at the parole, just the numbers year by year, 2014, 4,000, 2015, 4,500, 2016, 5,300, all the way in that range until you get to 22, 795,000 people, 23, 802,000 people. That's extreme. That's a circumvention of the law. That is a pull factor in a way that I agree with my colleague from Florida that it was on purpose. And so we're not talking about immigration in this committee, we're talking about security.
Mr. Pfluger, can I
Actually,
respond?
my time has expired, and I don't have anybody else in the queue right now. Mr. Menendez, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to just pick up from where Mr. Pfluger left off regarding what we have jurisdiction over in this committee, right? And you and Mr. Jimenez have talked about the intentionality, the purpose in which the border policy has been constructed by the Biden administration to allow people into the country. It was part of HR2 when you went after NGOs, because NGOs are part of this conspiracy to circumvent our American laws. You're right, this is Homeland Security, right? And we don't have jurisdiction like Chair McCall does in foreign affairs or certain things. We have a wide range of jurisdiction here, yet we have been singularly focused on the border at the detriment. You know, the thing for me and so many of the other committee members here from New York, both sides of the aisle, this was a select committee after 9/11. That means something to me. It means something to a lot of people on this committee. And we can talk about the border. A lot of us have been to the border. We have people from border states. I myself, in my first year, went to the border twice. We care. And you want to talk, the chair alluded to how we treat each other in this committee. There have been a lot of accusations about Democrats. We don't care. We want to have our head in the sand. That's not true. But we listened. We had a conversation. Let's talk about this committee and its jurisdiction. We've held 17 hearings, 17
Maybe he's
on
not
the
gonna
border.
cry. Maybe it was theatrics.
And this impeachment's part of
That's
that.
probably what it
We
was.
have held zero, I repeat, zero full committee hearings dedicated to emergency preparedness, cyber threats, infrastructure protection, transportation security, Department of Homeland Security management, or information sharing and intelligence efforts. With the global dynamic that we have not lived up to our oversight obligation here on this committee because you all are obsessed with the border. Because you bend the knee to the orange Jesus, as you refer to him across the aisle. That's what this is about.
What the fuck are you
And
talking
we have
about? You're done. No, that's not what it's
our
about.
jurisdiction
That's
on
not
this.
what it's about, you little fucking cunt. That's not what it's about. It's about that our borders should be secure, and they're not. 10 million people have come over the border. How many Americans have died because of this fucking attitude? It's not being used politically. That's what you're using it for. We're tired of it. The American people are tired. That's why there's 1 million men headed to the southern border. Yeah, they're not talking about that tonight, are they? No, they're not talking about 1 million men are headed to the southern border. They're going to secure the border because the federal government refuses to. We're invoking our right. We're going to nullify theirs. Don't you get it? It's because of this. Trash. What a piece of fucking human trash.
Okay, we have passed multiple bills out of this, and actually Mr. Swalwell and I did them together. Mr. Garbarino did some across the aisle. You can't say all. One of the things we often do is we say all and never and everybody. And you just be careful with those
Mr.
words.
Chair, I said 0 full committee hearings. 0 full committee hearings. You're talking about legislation. I said 0 full committee hearings.
We've had markups on cyber in this full committee, so it has happened. I recognize Ms. Sheila Jackson. Any on this side? Ms. Sheila Jackson Lee for 5 minutes.
I think the level of intensity is clearly, to my friends on the other side of the aisle, Mr. Chairman, and you as their leader, continuously missing the point. All of the accusations that have been made, we're baffled as to why the solution is the impeachment of a sitting officer of the federal government. It baffles us as to why Mr. Ivey's recitation is not appropriate. Because, again, if I can go back to the things that offend me, you never answered because we never got a chance to vote for several amendments of Mr. Swalwell, who described the horrors of the situation that we see. We see an outside individual who has no office at this point in time governing the agenda of this committee, and that is the former President of the United States, who has clearly made it every single day his call to say, do not pass the supplemental security, border security bill, and you following it. You continuing to press for the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, and it started out by saying baffled, and maybe someone would be kind enough to answer how his impeachment or this impeachment advantages the American people and what good will come of his impeachment, what number of additional persons will be held at the border, what laws will be put in place overnight, because you've impeached the secretary. I went back to Mr. McCall's recitation of the issue dealing with criminal aliens, and of course, detention of criminal aliens is the responsibility of the Attorney General and any alien who is inadmissible by reason of having committed any offense, and he went over sex trafficking, human trafficking, etc. I don't have a disagreement on that issue. How is Mr. Mayorkas violating the law and not adhering to making sure that at the border, his staff, Border Patrol, and in particular Customs and Border Protection, are weeding out these kinds of individuals if he had the resources to do so? So taking him away is not going to enhance my friend from Texas' concern about sex trafficking and human trafficking. You give no answer to the final answer that is going to come about tonight, which is the vote on impeachment. You give no answer to why Mr. Mayorkas was not afforded a due process and allowed to come with a lawyer or to get rescheduled. None of that was allowed. And you give no answer to why an outside third party is controlling the agenda of this committee. Maybe I should yield to you, Mr. Chairman, as to, is this committee being guided by, directed by an outside unelected person, certainly not a member of Congress, certainly not a chairman, certainly not a member of House leadership, Democrat or Republican, whose public statements suggest that we are here at
Is the gentlelady
the
asking
appropriate,
that
I am
question?
going to yield, we're here at close to midnight or 11:14 p.m. because we've been directed by former President Donald Trump to show as much blockage to anything dealing with comprehensive immigration reform and doing our job as we possibly can do. And so you're a fine gentleman that we've engaged in and have certain mutual interests on this committee. And I guess my colleague said that this is about Homeland Security, and I happen to be one of the, in essence, longevity members from 9/11, and a time that I will never forget, as I will never forget January 6th. So I do yield to you, Mr. Chairman, as to are we being directed by Donald Trump, and why are we here being guided by his desires to win an election?
Absolutely not. No one has asked me to do this. I'm doing this out of, my participation in this is out of a genuine love for the country and love for the Constitution. And I see a secretary who is basically choosing to subvert the laws for his own agenda. And I think her time has expired.
Have we engaged the secretary to be a problem solver, Mr. Chairman? I think not.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
I yield back.
I get to respond.
I now recognize Mr. McCall.
I have a tremendous respect for my friend from Texas, and she and I have worked on many human trafficking bills. I think what concerns me is that we passed a law that said that specifically with, the aggravated felony cases, and my U.S. attorney friends know this well, that whether it be human trafficking, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, these are precisely the individuals you don't want to get a pass to come into the country. And yet, in the DHS memorandum that was up on appeal to the Supreme Court in the United States versus Texas case, they talked about the fact that that memorandum said personnel should not rely on the fact of conviction when deciding to enforce a law. It was clear the court was concerned about this because it goes against what Congress stated. Shall is a mandatory language. It's not permissive. And there's a reason why. We don't want convicted, aggravated, not just convicted felons, but aggravated felons coming into the country. And so what the secretary did by carving this exception out in his memorandum was like a green light that it was okay. And he was telling his Border Patrol, hey, you know what? In fact, you don't have discretion. Let these people in. And what's happened? We've heard the testimony, witness after witness, whether it be fentanyl, whether it be MS-13, gangbangers, just horrific acts of violence have come from the policy. That is really one of the issues here.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
Of course, yeah.
Are you saying that the secretary has a policy where individuals with a criminal history that includes an aggravated felony who are stopped at the border are released without detention or without?
It has happened, and in fact, it's based upon the memorandum that went up to the Supreme Court.
No, I know what the memorandum is.
You shall not rely on the fact of conviction.
I know the memorandum, what that memorandum
Well, that's what
says.
he's telling his agents.
No.
Don't rely on the fact of conviction. So,
because do you agree with me?
Even the Fifth Circuit said, wow, this is problematic.
But
that they would
you're not talking about people who commit aggravated.
You can't enter.
a mandatory statute. The Fifth Circuit, who laid the predicate on facts that went to the Supreme Court that held there wasn't standing, that the Biden Solicitor General said that impeachment was a remedy. Go back to this, that problematic that he would defy a mandatory congressional statute. And if this is what we're talking about, if you're letting in drug traffickers, human traffickers, sex traffickers, and Ms. Jackson Lee and I have worked very hard on the human trafficking issue together. And we've done some great work. But I don't, the idea that they're getting released into our society, I mean, it's happening. And if you don't know that, it's real. And that's what's making it so dangerous right now.
Would you yield for another question?
Sure.
Yield. If you are making the accusation that the new policy of the Department of Homeland Security is either that undocumented immigrants who are convicted of an aggravated felony while here, removed into ICE detention, and then are released based on the policy, or that those with a prior criminal history of an aggravated felony are apprehended at the border and then released, I beseech you to put in the record some evidence of that assertion, because what the policy that you're reading says does not support that proposition, and there is no evidence to support that proposition.
Well, I guess my time's expired, Mr. Chairman. I would simply submit the Fifth Circuit's opinion. It states very clearly.
I think it's already been.
It states very clearly what the Secretary has carved out exception to the laws of Congress.
I'm asking for evidence of that specific example that you used. The policy does not.
Our time has expired, and we're not going to continue to debate it, but folks can yield to either of you for a continuance of the discussion. And at this point, my queue is empty. Is there any other discussion on Mr. Ivey's amendment? Okay. There being no further discussion, the question now occurs on the amendment offered by Mr. Ivey. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not adopted.
I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested pursuant to the committee Rule 7C. Further proceedings on this question are postponed. Are there any other amendments to the amendment in the nature of the substitute?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Mr. Ivey has an amendment at the desk.
Mr. Chairman, reserve a point of order.
Point of order is reserved. The clerk will distribute the amendment. clerk report the amendment?
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to HRes 863, offered by Mr. Ivy, number 023. Page 2, line 2, strike, quote, "in his," end quote, and all that follows through page 20, line 11, and insert the following. There is no evidence that constitutes grounds for the impeachment of Secretary Alejandro N. Mayorkas based on the constitutional standard for impeachment. The committee's failure to satisfy the constitutional standard and the complete absence of evidence that could justify impeachment is underscored by preeminent constitutional law scholar, Harvard professor Lawrence Tribe, and 24 other constitutional law scholars who wrote in a January 10, 2024 letter, quote, "Although House Republicans have offered various justifications for an impeachment, the underlying basis appears to be their view that Secretary Mayorkas's policy decisions have degraded border security and involved objectionable uses of enforcement discretion. House Republicans have also publicly asserted that Secretary Mayorkas testified falsely in stating that he is enforcing existing federal law and that the southern border is closed and secure. When the framers designed the Constitution's impeachment provisions, they made a conscious choice not to allow impeachment for mere maladministration. In other words, for incompetence, poor judgment, or bad policy. Instead, they provided that impeachment could be justified only by truly extraordinary misconduct, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. U.S. Constitution, Article 2, 4. Thus, as Charles L. Black Jr. noted in his influential handbook, impeachment is not permitted for mere inefficient administration or administration that does not accord with Congress's view of good policy. Simply put, the Constitution forbids impeachment based on policy disagreements between the House and the executive branch, no matter how intense or high stakes those differences of opinion. Yet that is exactly what the House Republicans appear poised to undertake. The charges they have publicly described come nowhere close to meeting the constitutional threshold for impeachment, end quote.
The gentleman is recognized, Mr. Ivy is recognized for 5 minutes to discuss the amendment.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, point of order?
At this point, I would withdraw my point of order, even though I disagree, particularly with the first language, the first paragraph of the amendment. I believe it is proper in order.
So disagreed, but germane. Okay. Mr. Ivy, you are recognized.
We'll call it a policy difference, right? I thank the gentleman and the chairman. And I remain open to amending the language, including the predicate language that is not the exact quote language from the Professor Tribe and the scholars. But the point again is that I think it's important for us to lay out what the legal standard is and provide the guidance and the expertise of constitutional scholars who have experience with respect to the impeachment issue as a constitutional standard and how to apply it. And, I think it's important here in part because we had so little testimony about it at the hearings other than the Bowman and Pearlstein testimony, which has now been voted down by the majority. And so this would be another attempt to try and get that language included into the articles of impeachment as they are passed over to the Senate, just to make it clear that this is the legal standard that they should be applying as they review the evidence against Secretary Mayorkas. And I think it's actually captures the nature of the debate that we've been having for the past, is it 14 hours now, I think? Something around there. The point about the policy decisions, about degrading the border security, has been made repeatedly by my Republican colleagues over there. Sometimes they quote numbers, sometimes they quote data, sometimes they refer to emotional appeals about testimony of survivors of violence or criminal activities that have been committed against them. This goes directly to that piece. And then the second aspect of it, I think they capture as well. I think the overall argument by the Republicans, in part on Article 2, is that Secretary Mayorkas testified falsely and we've gone back and forth about whether that's the case or not. The Democrats have one view, the Republicans have another. But again, the point I think is that this is the record we're sending over to the Senate. Fortunately, they're going to have the final word on whether either of those two articles of impeachment should be found to be sufficient. I don't think they'll find either to be that. That's their call, though, and that's their constitutional obligation. And I think it's our constitutional obligation to give them the information along these lines because it's directly relevant to the decision that they're going to have to make. We go back to the point with respect to maladministration, mere inefficient administration. I think there's been a debate about whether this is maladministration or something else. Some of you have also argued that maladministration may be sufficient, or I think Mr. Higgins actually might have said that I think he had a separate definition for what maladministration was. Whatever it is, let's send this over to the Senate. Let's give them a full and complete record that's balanced and neutral and allows them to carry out their constitutional obligation based on the record that we send them. And with that, I yield back.
Do any other members wish to speak on the amendment?
Chairman.
You recognize for 5 minutes, Mr. Magaziner.
Just briefly, because, man, we've been through this a bunch, but I do want to reiterate. I'm glad to hear my colleagues on the other side recognize that policy disputes are not ground for impeachment. I'm glad to hear them recognize that maladministration or thinking that the secretary is doing a bad job is not grounds for impeachment. The question is, did he break the law?
Yes.
And did he break the law to an extent that it constitutes a high crime or misdemeanor?
Yes.
And the answer, again, is no.
Yes.
The answer is no.
Yes.
Because within the resources that he has, he is doing
the ability
his job
to enforce
to the best
law.
of his ability.
You don't have to allow anybody
He
in,
has
sir. He has the
capacity
ability
for
to enforce the law. And it
34,000
doesn't cost any more money to
detention beds.
enforce the law.
The average daily census is 37,000. If the census was 7,000, you could argue he's willfully not doing his job. But 37,000 out of a capacity of 34,000 means that he is detaining people within the resources that Congress has provided to him. And in Article 1 of the impeachment amendment in the nature of a substitute, 6 out of the 7 laws that my colleagues claim he has broken have to do with that very point, with detention. And so he is using his discretion within the bounds of the law. And on parole...
The government, folks, what he's saying is that this is a policy dispute. That Mayorkas is doing everything that he's supposed to do. He just doesn't have enough resources. Nowhere, anywhere in our immigration does it say, bring them in, find out where they're from, and then let them free. Nowhere. That is a decision of the U.S. government that is currently running this shit. You can't complain that there's a crisis at the border when all you have to do is say, okay, we believe that you're an asylee, but you're going to have to go through the process, and you got to stay where you are. Because you've already traveled from some other nation. It was only supposed to be, the policy is, only the following nation, meaning that if you're in Guatemala, you can only go to the next country up to ask for asylee, to be an asylee. You can't go from Guatemala all the way up through Central America, through Mexico, and into the U.S. border and say, hey, I'm here for asylum. You can ask for asylum all along the way. If you don't, then you're not an asylee. You're an illegal immigrant. These fucking cunts.
3 for me. It says Alejandro Mayorkas willfully refused to comply with the detention mandate set forth in Section 235B 2 Alpha of the Immigration and Nationality Act, requiring that all applicants for admission who are not clearly and beyond a doubt entitled to be admitted shall be detained for a removal proceeding. And there's many more of these types of cited pieces and subsections of the law that he did not comply with. I go back to a document that I inserted earlier from the Speaker of the House, and it talks about in 2023 that CBP encountered over 3.2 million people, aliens at both borders, 2.5 million of them at the Southwest in particular. And in that same time frame, ICE only removed 142,580. That's 4.4%. So there have been numbers that have suggested that it's 85% have been removed. We've heard all this. 3.2 million people. That is why we're here. It is so egregious that he has circumvented the law in so many different ways that he has not complied with the Immigration and Nationality Act in any way, shape, or form. I'm going to ask my colleague, Mr. Menendez, do you trust Border Patrol agents? You mentioned that you've been to the border. Do you trust what they tell you when you go down there?
I do.
Okay. I love the passion, by the way. We have the same passion on this side of the aisle for 3 years now. I trust Border Patrol agents as well. And I submitted this from the Border Patrol Union earlier, this document. Let me read something from this document. This administration implemented a reckless extortion scheme that was specifically intended to overwhelm the system, mislead the public about the system, pressure the public by overwhelming the country with people it would release into communities, and ultimately force Congress to adopt its proposed reform, which essentially mirrors the policies it implemented and does little to enhance security at the border. It goes on, but I think we agree that we both trust what Border Patrol agents are telling us. Every single agent that I've ever talked to, ICE, CBP, Border Patrol, anybody in DHS in the dozens of visits that I've been down to the border have told me there are no consequences. That's why we're here, because of a circumvention of the law. The numbers don't lie. These are coming from Secretary Mayorkas that testified in front of us.
Will the gentleman yield for?
Sure.
So listen, I want to talk about this point because, on this side, we talk a lot about how this was sort of a predetermined destination, and you're talking about numbers. And remember, before the expiration of Title 42, there were a lot of predictions of an immense surge that was going to happen in the days right after the expiration of Title 42. I remember we had a Border Patrol agent come here and give testimony about the numbers after Title 42. And when he said that the numbers went down, there was a complete disbelief on that side of the aisle, to the point where people asked if they were using different definitions. He testified that they were not. You could have believed him in that, but...
I'll take my time back. I'm not talking about Title 42. I'm talking about Section 235 Bravo 2 Alpha. Yep. And you can go on and look through every other subsection of the Immigration Nationality Act. This is a failure to detain. This is a failure to deport. This is a circumvention, a willful circumvention of the laws that were already on the book. So the discussion...
Will the gentleman yield for 1 second? Just a quick point. I just don't want to move the goalposts, right? Because you had asked me if I trust Border Patrol agents. I said I do. You said that you do as well, and you trust that what they present to us. I'm giving you an instance where that was not the case amongst all your Republican colleagues. And so that was the point that you had raised, and I was addressing
the
at that
issue
point.
at hand is not Title 42 in these articles.
It's about trusting, your question was about trusting Border Patrol
The
agents.
issue at hand is about the subsections when it comes to detainment and parole. The circumvention is so egregious, it's so extreme, that 10 million people, and we may not even know the full extent of it. What really worries me is that this committee was formed after the 9/11 attacks with 19 people who orchestrated those. We've had 300 people that match the terror watch list that have come in under Secretary Mayorkas's watch. That is not Homeland Security in any definition. I yield back.
Mr. Carter, do you wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to compliment Mr. Ivey for what I think is a very sound amendment. When we look at the thoughtfulness of the framers of the Constitution, when the framers designed the Constitution, impeachment provisions, they made a conscious choice not to allow impeachment for mere maladministration. In other words, incompetence, poor judgment, or bad policy. I can look at risk rating 2.0 and tell you I think it's bad policy. When Secretary Mayorkas sat at that table, I said it's bad policy. I think it's ill-conceived. I think it hurts the American people. I think it's just downright wrong. But it's not grounds to impeach. The framers were very clear in the Constitution that they thought this day might come. And so they were careful to have that language that language inserted